Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie, and I am with Festivals and Events Ontario. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us for the first 2024 Festivals Helping Festivals. So I hope you all had a great time off, rested, and coming back with vim and vigor. So today's topic is diversity in the festival and event world, in planning, in attracting people of diverse cultures, and so here we are. And Marnie is going to be late, so I'm going to be dependent on all of you to pull me through this hour and jump in and join in and share anything, things that you know of, things that you've heard of, etc. So here we go. So um, first question. Representation of diverse performers. How can festivals ensure a diverse lineup of performers that reflects a variety of backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives? So how do you do that in planning your events, your festivals? Um, do you have a resource, a pool of communities that you go to? How do you get the support? How do you do the outreach? So over to you, festival and event planners.
I can share some info if you'd like.
Great, that's great, Lisa.
So, as a multicultural festival,
Hmm.
we actually partner with a lot of cultural community groups within our festival. So, for example, this year we have 25 groups that are performing or that are actually hosting our pavilion. So, we kind of work with them to bring in their cultural groups that represent a diverse um, dynamics or diverse groups,
Demographic.
demographics. That's the word. Thank you. And what we do is for some of the groups that aren't represented within our community group, we do reach out to different organizations or different cultural groups to get them also represented on one of our stages. So we do rely on a lot of cultural groups and community groups within our city of Mississauga.
And I don't know, for just from my perspective, how do you find them? I know that I know there's Muslim Fest and I know there's Oktoberfest. There's the German, the Muslim, the South Asian, the African. Is there um community groups that you have access to, or do you have to go to the city to find out who they are?
So we do both. So we do have community groups that have like cultural centers within our organization or have groups within our city. And then we do have contacts within the city that actually support us as well and would say, hey, have you reached out to this group? They do our Japan Fest. So we do have that type of connection. So we just kind of get out there and have a board member that just keeps Googling what groups are out there this year and kind of try to work with them that way.
Okay, great. Great. I'll probably come back to you later, Lisa. Kyle, over to you.
Yeah, so one thing I was going to mention is it's less about like how to find it, but it's where to find diversity in your programming. So a lot of the events that I help program involve busker entertainment, busker festivals, things like that. And one of the things I used as a process was like most, I would usually have a wish list in mind, artists who I'd be thinking of, and I would always kind of be thinking of like a tentative lineup. And what I would do is I would kind of build that lineup or program in my mind, and then step back and look at it objectively, and think, what does this look like? Who is there? Anyone who's being left out? Is there, it typically, and historically, it is getting better, but historically, lineups at festivals like that have been dominated by, basically straight white male performers. And, there typically hasn't been a lot of, female presence or artists of color. So sometimes it's just kind of stepping back and going, where I know that I have a wish list and I'm not doing this intentionally, but am I through that, is there an artist who maybe I was considering that maybe I should consider bringing into this lineup? Was there someone who, uh, an artist who, maybe faces additional barriers in their work? Is there someone else who I can give an opportunity here? And it really does make a big impact. It's a little bit anecdotal, but a story that I want to share is, in running a company many years ago when I started hiring female stilt performers to work alongside me. Uh, I was doing one event and hearing for the first time at events that I'd been to for many years, hearing a child in the audience going, "Oh, girls can be stilt walkers too." And just kind of feeling the weight of that, not realizing that how much that visibility matters. So I'm sure that's something that we can talk about a little bit more, but
Hmm.
just the importance of why that visibility is important, and having and bringing people into the spotlight and into the stage who maybe you don't typically see often on your stages.
And is it just stages or is it supporting, so the supporting community, your volunteers, your sound and lighting, your the food, like, and admitting people and volunteers. And I mean, I just wonder, do do festivals, I mean, we have our list of our plan and things that we have to do, but is there a column that says diversity on it? Or like, that kind of sounds weird, but do we include that or do we even consider it? I don't know what the answer is. Because like I'm a white woman, right? So I don't know what the answer is, and I don't run events. So I run conferences, and I have to think of it from that perspective. But yes, just curious. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think there's a sharing of information. I need y'all to jump in here because Marnie can't join us today. So, I mean, even if you have a question, you may not have an answer, but you may have a question. So,
So I will quickly jump in. Like I don't necessarily like, there may be a resource that's available. People who work with not-for-profit organizations in terms of like a developed process. But I don't necessarily know that there's a rubric or a checklist. I think what you mentioned of, it's not just our stages, it's all aspects of your operation, all aspects of your organization. I know we talked on a Tuesday talk previously as well, as, even looking at your board,
mhm.
stepping back and looking at your board and saying and asking, is this reflective of our community? And I think that's the same thing there, is in terms of your volunteers, in terms of your vendors, in terms of your board, is this being reflective of our community, and not just who our community has been in the past, but who our community is now? Because communities and neighborhoods grow and change. And there's something in the accessibility conversation of the, like, nothing about us without us. If you can imagine running an event
Mm.
that's bringing focus to the community members who in your community who are disabled, and if you invite dignitaries and have a stage, and maybe one of those dignitaries uses a mobility device, and your stage has 3 steps. I mean, it's just a hypothetical situation. But maybe if someone was on your planning committee, or if you were doing something with your community, somebody would probably flag that early on and going, we need to have an accessible stage. And I also think about those things like Snuggies. Like, we all loved getting the Snuggie way back, but a lot of those things that became really popular were about developing something that was geared towards people who were disabled. but by making something that was accessibility focused, it actually made it made things better for everyone. Everyone loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was
Mm-hmm.
able to use it and access it. It was, creating a level playing field isn't necessarily about putting focus or spotlight on one area of community. It's about making it more accessible and open to everyone.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. That's great. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to share from their perspective of planning? Dave, I saw you
Yeah, I'm
unmute
going
yourself.
to sort of jump in here and just ask some of the municipalities, like how often do you check in with your community or with your, municipal partners to see how the culture and diversity has changed in your community? And I'm going to use the example of Oktoberfest, and I'll go back 7 years when I was involved there. We Oktoberfest was about celebrating Bavarian heritage, and everything came with it. And yes, it was a beer festival. Well, early on in our tenure, we realized that through a community and demographic lens, the community really changed, and the German heritage and the German speaking people in Kitchener were now second, and Spanish people were it was the biggest demographic of outside communities. And I think they're going through that process again, and are now realizing that Bavarian heritage is now fifth or sixth in the community, and there's there's Hindus and the Muslims and Indians and East Indians, and so now it's still, the festival is still about promoting the Bavarian culture and history, but you've got a very different lens on how you present that now, right? Because it's now more about a lot of family groups, and beer is not the most important driving factor. It's large families coming out. So I'm just wondering how often you touch in with city partners to test that lens and see how your community has changed. Will make me randomly pick municipalities
Yeah,
here.
Olga. Olga's got her hand up.
Hi, everyone. The short answer, I think, to Dave's question would be I don't think we have like an established regular practice of doing it. I feel like it might be something we should be all doing as a municipality. Usually the groups will come to us. So for example, this year we had Afro-Caribbean Festival. It was the very first year we've done it. And so the group came to us, and I didn't. We noticed that there are a lot of folks of African descent. In Brandon County, there's actually a lot of history around that, and our Arts, Culture, and Heritage officer is actually digging into it right now. We're kind of collecting the information, and I know that there is an idea of kind of looking into some of the even businesses that are owned by the folks with African descent, which I think is great. And when we had the festival on September 9th, it was a great success. Kudos to that group. They brought a lot of folks, even from, I think, GTA. Everyone, it was a lot of fun. It was a great learning experience because they brought a lot of traditional dances, traditional workshops, a lot of vendors. So it was a great learning experience. It was a lot of fun. But again, I don't know if we should look at the stats and understand what are the groups that are represented in the communities, how it changed over the years with stats. The problem is that we get them like 5 years later, right? So it's kind of hard. So the evidence would probably be a bit anecdotal, but Dave, like I live in Kitchener, and I totally agree with you regarding the Oktoberfest. That the population did change, but I think the area does have a lot of German heritage, though. So it makes sense, and I know those festivals are attended very well. Oktoberfest is still quite popular, but I agree that uh, somehow we need to better understand, I think, the scope. I don't know if any other municipality has a better understanding of.
I guess using your example of your Afrikaner festival, it's still important to know your market, right? And know,
Yeah.
like, cultural groups are interested in learning about other cultural groups. So, well, how do you affect or build your programming around what's important to them? Like, it might be massive family event type of thing. So even in that African cultural festival, it's how do we promote it to the East Indian community? How do we promote it to all the Spanish community? And what are their values, and how can we turn that or build our programming around that with the Afrikaner community to bring almost a it's almost like every festival is looking through that multicultural lens on how do we attract, because we know, and I know through surveying that we did for the Oktoberfest, is those groups are very interested in coming out and being involved in learning, but it's finding that fit and what works for each specific group. And sometimes it might be altering your programming and building different programming that's going to get the people into that fold, and then you know move around through the different pieces that you have to offer.
Kyle, do you have anything to add to that, Olga? Or
Um,
no?
I guess I don't know. Like regular, I think like a larger conversation needs to take place, and I'll be curious to hear how other communities approach this. We do, like, our county is very small, so I feel like we do know what is happening in the community. Like we're represented on a lot of little committees, and we regularly check in with them. But I wonder if there are some like established practices in larger communities, because that would be, I think, harder to keep an eye on.
Thanks, Olga. That's a great question. Kyle.
One thing I was going to mention, it's interesting talking about Oktoberfest. An example I was going to bring up was in Toronto. We have a large Polish festival. I'm not involved with it, but it's just an interesting kind of case study to look at. The Rossensvale Polish Festival. They actually changed their name briefly, and there was major feedback from all communities that they weren't looking to erase the identity of the Polish festival. The Polish festival obviously celebrating the culture, the history, the food, and the things that people love taking part in. And I think part of the conversation we're having is that it's not about like erasing or just kind of creating a broader focus to a festival. I think it's about how to bring everyone into the experience and everyone to be part of it and reflecting your community. One of the things that we have in Canada that's wonderful is that we have a vertical mosaic mindset towards culture rather than the American melting pot. It's about maintaining and celebrating the things that make us unique, our pasts, our history, our identities. And in celebrating those things and giving them the spotlight and giving them the chance for all of us to experience that, that's what exercises our empathy. And that's what helps us to connect with each other and get to know each other better and to strengthen our communities, which is one of the reasons why culture is so important. in Ontario and in our country is that it's really what helps to strengthen those connections and those ties. And it's not by creating just, washing over everything. It's about, really giving people the opportunity to celebrate and to engage in understanding one another. So, the Polish festival, I think, was a great example of that the community and the city of Toronto wasn't looking to, replace the Polish festival with something else. It's we still want to have the Polish festival. We want to have those same experiences, celebrating the music and the food. But it's just how can we make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, everyone has a place there, and more people have a chance to be seen.
And
You
Kyle, when
know,
you talk about the melting pot, and that's very much the US culture. If you come into our country, everybody assimilates to our values and our core beliefs and everything else. And that the best description I've ever heard is Canada's like a tossed salad. Is we're all in the big bowl and mixed together, but we all have our individual flavors that are still recognizable throughout the salad, and it doesn't blend into you know a melting pot or a stew or whatever. Everybody is still identifiable.
Yeah, and everything that is added to it makes it more. If something wasn't there, you feel like it would be a little less. It's just like, this salad's pretty great, but I'm really missing those croutons. It's just it's everything. Every part of your community strengthens it, and that's something that we celebrate across Ontario. Is that we don't want everyone to change and become more like us. We want everyone to celebrate their uniqueness because who they are and who they bring to the table makes it more.
it reminds me of something I read or saw online where I think it was in Winnipeg. There was a group of um, grandmothers. They were Polish or Ukrainian, but they would have a, one of their tourism experiences was making bread, like from a Polish perspective. And people would travel from all over the world just to go and figure out like what does a Polish grandmother, how do they make bread? I went to Italy and I went to a cooking class there too to learn how to make pasta and antipasto. So there's so many different elements that we can bring to the table. It's just how are we doing that as a festival event community? And I love what you said, Kyle, not to whitewash it, sorry, but not to whitewash it, but to add the flavor to it. And how are we getting the influence of our communities that represent? And sometimes I don't even think I'm thinking of, you know, Oktoberfest needs to have an East Indian element to it, but like a cultural element to it, or maybe they do. But like I'm thinking about bringing the East Indian community in to help run the festival and their ideas and experiences that they're bringing to the table. Yeah. And I see Zelda on. Lisa, you go ahead, but I see Zelda on, who's a student learning events, and she's also got her own company. So I'd love to hear your perspective too, Zelda. But let Lisa go first, and then we'll come back to you.
Sorry, I was just going to kind of agree with what Kyle and David were both saying. And some of the stuff that we do when we're planning our festival is when we work with our groups, we ask them to look at their programming and don't focus on your own people of your own kind. Focus on what you can teach someone who's new. So for us, it's like we try to make sure a lot of our programming is educational. A lot of hands-on stuff as well, where there is dance lessons or cooking lessons, just so that people can get an appreciation for why you do things the certain way you do it. For example, our India Pavilion one year had a demonstration on the turbans and what the colors meant. And just educating people a little bit on why people look different and what's the reasonings behind it. The only thing we try to keep out of is we do keep politics out of the whole festival. And we try not to have people promote their religion. Like but just showcasing their culture. Like explain to us, like for Italy, like why do you make the pasta this certain way? Or what is it, the differences of the sauces? So that you get an appreciation for that culture. When you see someone walking down the street, it's like, okay, I get now why they're wearing their clothing that they do, or why they eat the certain foods that they do. So sometimes it's just educational. And once people start to learn about it, they start to appreciate it, and just getting more inclusiveness, I guess.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
And to ask questions, just to ask questions. I mean, in Italy, one of my teammates, when their cooking course, asked the chef, like, why do you use a bidet? And the chef just said, we don't understand why you don't. Right? So it's just like that interaction and that fun, and because it can be fun. That cooking class was a lot of fun. So, okay, Zelda, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, equity, diverse, such a unique topic. I was trying to find a resource. I participated in some of this innovation training session before the holidays around equity, and it was so eye-opening. I think it's kind of like what you put forward. It's just putting yourself in somebody else's perspective, which isn't something naturally that we do sometimes. And so I think like we need to be nudged or nuanced or pushed in order to sometimes incorporate those ideas into our systems. And so they start getting embedded. And so some of the things I'm even seeing just on campus is just making sure we're offering room for accommodations, or doing things like around timing. So when we have meetings and stuff, that we offer like 3 weeks notice at least, so that students have time if they need to make accommodations around whether it's transportation, support services, booking, things that are necessary. And it's as simple as, if we don't give 3 weeks notice, we are automatically excluding potentially a whole portion of the community. And we take that for granted. And again, for our student leaders on campus, if they're not impacted by that, these are kind of these equitable opportunities that don't come to happen, and that those portions of the population get negated over and over again. So when we're planning festivals and events, and we're recruiting volunteers, and we're bringing people on, like, it's such a simple piece of, like, at least 3 weeks notice, if not like 2 weeks notice, or 5 weeks, like 5 weeks notice, in order to help ensure participation of all those individuals, and then start embedding our processes and procedures so that becomes status quo, and so that we know and understand why we are doing those things. And I'm finding on campus we are getting better when we're doing festivals and events to have a line item that says, do you require accommodations? So it starts getting more normalized potentially. And then if things keep popping up, it's kind of like they become FAQs, or they become part of your process. So like Kyle was noting at the beginning, we have stairs, but more mobile options need to be taken into account. And we start seeing that request popping up, then we don't try to shoehorn it in. It just becomes part of the process and automatically in place. So I'm finding this term, I'm having some visual issues. And so stuff like having things offered, like translation, or being available in advance so I can read the documentation, just these little things that don't take a lot of time for us to put forward, but can have some really big impacts to ensure that a wider audience can participate and be good. And I see it especially when it comes to volunteers, when we're looking to recruit volunteers, and especially as we're getting potentially older demographics that want to participate in volunteering, looking at these equity, sustainable, and accommodation areas is pretty important. And then, so I'll try and see if I can find this presentation that I had a couple of weeks ago, and then I can just pass it on to you, Debbie. So it kind of had like a piece of a checklist, and again, kind of explaining why we do these different things. And for me, it was very insightful, because so many things I just aren't on my radar, and I need to be poked and nudged to be reminded to take those things into consideration. Good to
That's
see you,
great,
Debbie.
Zelda. Would I be able to share that with this group?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's
Okay.
it might be on a LinkedIn resource, so it'll be
Okay.
available for general. And
Okay,
then
that would be
I
great.
introduced Tara today, I'm going to put her on the spot. So she's a key resource here at the University of Waterloo too. I'm sure she might have some, I don't want to put her on the spot, but might have some insight and some resources as well. Cheers.
Sure, let's put Tara on the spot. I'm putting everybody on the spot today because I'm doing this by, without guidance, without Marnie. So, but I do have Kyle and Dave, so, and all of you. Go ahead, Tara.
Yeah, so Zelda invited me here today. I am the student equity specialist in the student success office. And I met Zelda through a peer mentorship program that we have called the Connection Collective. It's a group mentorship program for equity deserving students. And so we operate in a group capacity because we're looking at that intersectionality piece and understanding that everybody has different components to their identity. And so even when we're talking about something like representation, that's something that we factor into mentorship in the way that like we wouldn't try to match a student based on one part of somebody else's identity, right? Just to see that representation. So I guess my best example would be, as an Indigenous person, for example, I wouldn't want to be paired solely based on my Indigenous identity. I also have other components of my identity. And so we factor that in when we're looking for representation for our events as well, people, guest speakers, and everybody that are coming in. We try to offer access to a variety of different folks with a variety of different experiences and present our events in like a panel style or like a human library style so that students have the opportunity to speak to multiple different people with multiple different experiences. Because they always could connect with somebody based on something that they learn about them through conversation, as opposed to just visually seeing that somebody is representative, right? Or thinking in that way in terms of diversity. So I just am here today to kind of listen to folks' thoughts and jump in where I can, but I'm not hosting festivals or large scale events. We do some smaller scale things. And as Zelda was mentioning, embedding those practices into our events, sending out forms that ask if folks have accommodations ahead of time, making sure that we describe where the accessible entrances are when we're saying, we're hosting this event in this room. This is where the closest elevator is, just so that you know. So just embedding those kinds of pieces, introducing ourselves with pronouns. That's a huge component of our programming as well. Lots of different pieces, but I won't take up too much space. I'll kind of cap it there, but yeah.
Well, Terry, you're welcome anytime. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. We really appreciate it because, sometimes we get so tunnel vision in what we're doing that to bring somebody outside of our environment, our culture, helps us to shake us up a bit. Kyle, off you go.
I love that Zelda and Tara brought up just the conversation around equity, which I think is something really important to talk about as well. And also talking about the idea of intersectionality, that, one aspect of someone's identity is not their entire identity as well. When we're looking at event programming, especially in entertainment programming. For myself, this year this is my 20th year now doing festivals and events professionally, which is kind of crazy. But when I started, it was also a very different landscape. For myself, I was the first professional busker to come out on North America's Busker Festival circuit as a 2S LGBTQIA plus artist. As myself, I'm a man who is gay, and also, I'm also someone who lives with a disability. But I'm also someone who has many other aspects to my personality. But coming out as a street performer who is gay at the time, I was traveling to many different places where that may not have been safe to necessarily disclose. by disclosing it and by doing interviews for festivals, talking about this, I realized that I may be, it's possible that I may not be invited to those festivals, that I may be excluded from being included in that programming at the time. Again, things are changing. Things have not fully changed. But that's also why it's important to, look at things beyond the differences that we see as well, to think about the intersectionality and other aspects of our communities, and realize that as organizations, we're all learning and growing. Like this is a constant conversation. We're all constantly learning. And, even in the past year, I had an example of working with a pride organization in helping to advocate why it's important to have artists who are 2S LGBTQIA plus given priority to opportunities to being on the stages at a pride festival. Something that we would possibly think is maybe, would be the first thought, but it's something that wasn't the first thought. And something that, there was also some advocacy work that I did in terms of, there's the budget and that there's the ask, but making sure that the rates that these performers are given, particularly as 2S LGBTQIA plus artists, ensuring that the participation that they have meets industry standards. We understand that all festivals have different budgets and many are run by not-for-profit organizations. But if this is a festival that is celebrating the queer community, are we giving these artists an equitable rate for their participation, especially as artists who have probably faced additional barriers in their work? That there is risk in coming out, particularly in the history they've had, that it may have excluded them from opportunities, things like that, if this is their stage and this is a festival for their community, ensuring that their participation is given equitable consideration. And it's just one example. I obviously don't want to give a give a long speech here, but just something for consideration. And I can see Lisa, Olga has things to add.
Yeah, and I wanted to, before Olga goes ahead, something Zelda said about inclusion and everything. A few years ago, at our conference, we had some volunteers that didn't even think of this. I mean, they wanted to know if there was a prayer room. They were Muslim. And it was like, oh, okay, yes, we will assign this room to you to go in whenever you need to go and do your prayers. And like those are the types of things that if we're going to, I just think if we are asking people to come in, that if that's what they need, then at least provide some sort of space or corner or time for them to go and do what they need to do, to honor who they are as well, but not make it, they weren't asking for a public notification, but they just needed that space. And I thought, wow, do I ever have a lot to learn? And I still do. So Olga, over to you.
I just wanted to add a little bit on what municipalities could potentially could do and what we are doing right now in terms of accessibility. So I'm in charge of the seat applications and all those big special events that come in, and you probably all have an idea how the seat works. We have multiple departments on the committee, and one of the departments is actually accessibility division. So I have a person who reviews each application. Again, all the events are different, and I also review filming applications. And they also have to go through the seat committee. So and the same accessibility person reviews their applications as well. So they often provide their comments on how to make, a certain event more accessible. So for example, for Remembrance Day parades, often they're taking place on the grass. Grass is not considered accessible. So we usually request to have some chairs for veterans or senior folks. And then with filming, for example, they have to make sure they're filming on the sidewalk. They have to make sure there's I think it's 3 meters left of the pathway to make sure that if there's a person in a wheelchair, they have the space to use the sidewalk. So we don't have a policy for that yet. I know we're working on that right now, but I often try and strongly encourage the groups that organize events or bring filming in the county. They follow the suggestions.
Thanks, Olga. Dave, did you have something?
Yeah, and I was just going to suggest, some people might think, okay, how do we get this started? And, we're talking about a lot of different things. And I think one great idea is, if you don't have it already, is a community advisory panel. And, you can go through your local multicultural office and have them help you populate it. And it doesn't have to be huge. It can start out with 5 or 6 people representing different cultural groups, who can then share what's important to each of those groups and help you build your programming and your events, and keeping in mind their religious beliefs, their dietary belief needs, and everything else. So, that's something that can grow and can help your municipality or your city in many other aspects of what they do. So if you don't have a community advisory panel of some sort that you can call on, or that you can bring different groups in front of, I think it's a great suggestion to go back and start looking at those ideas to bring that group together and help share in the building and the programming and execution of your events.
Dave, I think that's a great idea. I just did a Google search, and I know this is something that we talked about before, but creating safe spaces for different groups. I know, Kyle, you talked about it, and it was something that never even dawned on me, that there's people out there who just don't really, like, as far as attendees, may not align with certain things. And so for festivals to consider creating a safe space, this says specifically for LGBTQ plus, but I think, like, yeah, I just think that's something else that we can think of and consider when we're planning our festivals. And yeah, that's it. Kyle, you had something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think, honestly, creating safe spaces could be just its own conversation, or probably even its own session of the conference, because it's something that is it's something that I think we're still writing the book on, but it's something that I've seen some awesome best practices, like when we were at Blue Mountain for their Rainbow Ski Weekend, which is now being rebranded as Blue Mountain Pride for this coming year, which is going to be absolutely awesome. They have implemented some amazing best practices in terms of, like, signage. They have TV signage throughout the village and throughout their hotels, even sharing things like where to find universal washrooms, which is something that we may not think of necessarily as organizers, but something that an attendee with that lived experience may have issues around safety with, even if that weekend is potentially a 2S LGBTQIA plus focused event. Things like, visibility is also hugely important. So, like, for them, they had rainbow flags throughout the village, which really marks that we are taking this space. This is space occupied for you. It doesn't exclude anyone else, but we are taking this space to create a safe space and to show that you are welcome here. And the other thing that I was going to mention is just the importance of including again, members from that community, they having that visibility, having seeing yourself and your community represented there. That's something that like we've done a lot of work with them. And when it came to this event coming up, they didn't actually even ask us for a quote. They just invited us, because they wanted to, as LGBTQIA plus artists, to be part of it. And it's something that is hugely important. When I go to certain spaces, if I'm going to somewhere new, I don't have, sometimes I might question whether I can hold my partner's hand. I might question, just simple things where when you don't have to question that, it makes a big difference. There was something else I thought of, but it just slipped my mind. So if someone else wants to jump in, feel free.
Tara.
And going off of what Kyle is sharing, I think the consistency piece is big too, right? Like it's not just that we're making one event feel safer or a couple of events feel safer and putting practices into place. It's like that consistency piece. And Zelda had mentioned this earlier with embedding these practices into everything that we do as well. I think people need to, attendees, participants, they need to know that like, oh yeah, like this organization or this municipality or this place, they make me like they feel like safe events for me to go to. They feel like welcoming events for me to go to. I know that if I go, I am going to feel this way. So really trying to be consistent and embedding practices into events and programs as well.
Thanks, Tara. Kyle?
I remembered the other point that I wanted to mention. It's in creating safe spaces is demonstrating allyship through all your spaces, including digital spaces. And this was something that, again, we saw an example of in the past year where something was going to be a pride-focused event. And obviously the internet comment section is not always the place where you find the nicest of comments. But one thing that we saw was an organization really demonstrating their allyship by taking a stand against those negative comments. Simple things like, if somebody is critical of 2S LGBTQIA plus events at like a resort or something like that, saying, really commenting directly, saying, well, you are welcome to not attend that weekend if this is something that you don't want to be a part of, just which, may seem strange for a tourism organization or something that relies on customers, but demonstrating that allyship really shows to people who are from that community that yes, these are people who stand alongside us, and that goes a long way, and also goes to affect those changes. The world doesn't change on its own. It's by people taking a stand and by showing that these are things that need to change. That's what creates change.
And
How
and
would you
Kyle,
go
just
about
building
getting
on what
that?
you're
Go
sorry.
ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say, building on what you're talking about there, it'd be all of our hopes that the responses will become not just you're not welcome this weekend, is you're not the kind of customer we're looking for at this resort. Period, end of question. And I know we've got a lot of hurdles to jump to get to that place, but I think that's we're helping build this community of embracing others and hopefully we'll see responses like that. Is that this just isn't the place for you. Period.
And I think we have to I think we have to accept the fact too, Dave, that like not every festival is going to appeal to everyone in your community. Whether it's a cultural festival, whether it's a film festival, whether it's a sporting event, it's not going to appeal to everybody. So I think, that's something to keep in mind as well. Carl.
And just to continue this thought is that creating safe spaces creates safe spaces for everyone. It's by showing that hate will not be tolerated. It's showing that you respect all identities. That that type of behavior just will not be accepted, and that helps everyone to feel a little bit safer. It's not about quashing anyone's personal beliefs. It's about saying that hate is not tolerated here.
I just did a query on give me 20 practices that festivals can follow diversity and inclusion in the festival and event sectors. And the last one that came up was anti-harassment policies. Develop and enforce a strict anti-harassment policy to ensure a safe environment for all attendees. So I can post this for you if you like. Some of them you may already have, some of them you may not, but it was just a question I asked and it popped up. So I'm going to pop it into chat for you. We are kind of coming to the end. Is there any burning questions so it won't let me do it. I'll send it to you all. So anyways, is there any burning questions that anybody has around this particular topic or feedback that they have for this? So
I guess I was just curious if FEO would be looking at providing like a toolkit or something around this. I appreciate it's a big topic and maybe out of scope for FEO, but I know for so many of the small groups that just don't have the resources to be able to pull something together, it would be good. And even if it's not baked in house, if there's like resources that they could vet potentially externally and provide like a referral or reference to, it would be really good. And it's simple things. It's always interesting to see what's happening on campus. We becoming kind of status quo now is that you do introduce yourself as with your pronouns. Are you she? Are you her? And then seeing if and when those things start populating into the general population on campus, where essentially many of the washrooms are being converted over to be like gender neutral. You still have male, female washrooms, but now more and more you have gender neutral washrooms, and there's like a change management piece that comes with it too. And I just think many of these smaller events, festivals, activities potentially might want to introduce some of those practices as they become more status quo. So just you guys are obviously know the topic's important because we're having a Tuesday talks about it. But yeah, I know we're running out of time and I have to dash as well, but just curious to see what the future looks like for FEO.
I'm going to jump in right now and say, yeah, it's a great idea. And I'm pretty sure we do have some stuff, but maybe we'll do a better job at farming it and locating it all in one place. We've got and I don't know how many people go around on our site, but in the vault, and that's where we keep, different policies and procedures, different operating ideas and strategies. So for sure, we'll, if we don't have, and I think we do have something, it might be limited, but we'll count on all of you or we'll connect with you, even individually, to share your ideas and stuff that we can add to the vault and into that diversity and inclusion portfolio. Great idea. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I have to dash. Thanks again for everything. Thanks, Deb, for hosting and winging it. It's awesome. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Zelda. Thanks for joining in.
Cheers.
Have a great week. Kyle, do you have something else you would like to add?
Yeah, there's just one more thing I wanted to add because I know many of the folks who are maybe on the call are part of they host festivals and events, but are part of other organizations that maybe have things like anti-harassment policies or diversity and inclusion policies and statements. But something that comes just through the practice of hosting a festival event. Sometimes they have individual needs or individual things. There was a BIA years ago that I was hosting an event at, and I noticed that in hosting the event, it created accessibility barriers because intersections were blocked. And when I talked to the BIA about it, they're like, no, we just did brand new streetscaping. It's all completely accessible. So like, yes, through regular everyday use, but when those spaces are blocked, how do people with mobility devices, traverse things like curbs? It's thinking about, maybe there are specific individual needs in terms of hosting the festival and event that maybe, requires just a separate focus or consideration. And I think just sometimes doing that, stepping back, asking questions, looking at things critically is sometimes what's needed to just create a new change, create a new idea, create a new opportunity. Even sometimes for myself when I'm programming, instead of thinking about these are the gaps that I need to fill, going to artists and asking what can they do, what can they bring, how do they work, what times do they need, working from what they can do sustainably and then seeing where it matches a need and just kind of reverse engineering the programming paradigm. So just kind of thinking that maybe the organization has a larger statement or policy, but how do those things maybe differ in running a festival or event? It's just one final thought that I want to bring, and to also ask, is there more appetite for like Zelda mentioned, more resources, more conversation around this? Just maybe people on the call, is this something that people want to do more learning about and want more resources for?
Why don't you just raise your hand, your virtual hand, the reactions button, if it's a yay or if you're up for it, so that Kyle can see. Thanks, Joe. Olga.
Yeah, I'm Joe here. I work
Hi,
for
Joe.
Creative Hub.
Ooh,
And I was
well,
going to say we have so many volunteers, and I feel like one of the major sort of, roadblocks is that, like, how do you then get the resources to, like, convey this information to volunteers? They're all, donating their time. But then they do very much need to have some sort of training that makes sure that, like, the space that we put all these systematic things in order for is also then one that's like a community acceptance space too, right? So I feel like, we're in a city building here for Creative Hub. We have like accessible washrooms, and a lot of our staff are trained on accessibility, diversity, but then it's like the volunteers are not, and they are a big group that does create that community for people coming into our festivals, and they do need to have access to that information. But how do you go about that? How do you, ask them to commit even more time to making sure that they are trained in those aspects as well, right?
yeah, and again, that's a big conversation too, because I know it includes communities and AOTA, but I think it's something that we can at least keep the conversation going on. So, all right, everyone, anything else? Well, thank you so much for joining us on the first 2024 Festivals Helping Festivals. Just like to remind you that our conference is coming up in February. If you haven't already registered, reach out to me and I will give you the promo code for it. And it's in Niagara Falls from the 26th to the 28th. And room rates, the block is going to be closing soon, and the early bird rates are going to be finished by the end of this week. So hope you will join us. And thank you so much. Again, any questions you have on it, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will not be having a Festivals Helping Festivals in February because we will be conference planning. So we'll be bringing that up again in March. So thank you. Take care, and hope to see you at the conference. Take care, everyone. Thanks.